What's going on, guys? My name is Aldeniro and welcome to a little bit of bonus content. I guess if you're listening to this on iTunes or SoundCloud or whatever podcast avenue you choose to drive down, this is a bonus episode, simply. It's just me. It was supposed to be me and a guest, but the guest couldn't really make it tonight, so I decided that I wanted to talk, and here I am. If you're watching on YouTube, this is a vlog. I don't know what changed in my mind, but I figured I just want to show my face a little bit more, and if it's possible, I'll do it in podcasts, but also it might be uncomfortable for some of the guests who aren't used to... Pretty much everyone who comes to my podcast is someone who is, like, not traditionally a podcaster of any kind. It's mostly just friends of mine. But anyway, there was actually something that I wanted to talk about before I get into the questions. I asked for questions on Twitter last night. And that is this idea of separating the art from the artist. And what I mean by that specifically is I'm a huge fan of this band called Brand New. And I was supposed to see them live last week on Thursday in Dublin in the Olympia Theatre, and about 6 days or so before I was supposed to see them, there was basically their lead singer Jesse Lacey was subjected to allegations regarding him grooming younger fans, younger female fans in around 2002 to 2006 or so, and the girls were as young as 15 allegedly. And there was this sort of thing. There was this one girl that came out and said, Jesse Lacey is a piece of shit. He used me and solicited nudes from me when I was 15. Things like that. Just really dark claims to make. And another person came forward with similar allegations. As far as I know, the two people don't know each other. But then Jesse Lacey himself released a statement. He apologized, not for anything in particular, and I would assume that's because if he apologized for the alleged offenses that he's been accused of, it would be a legal matter because he would be basically admitting to a crime. So he basically said he's a shitty person, he's a narcissist, he's hurt people in the past, he's cheated on his wife, he used to be a sex addict and things like that. And it got really grim and really dark, and Brand New ended up cancelling their remaining shows, and they're kind of in that weird process at the moment of being written out of history, which kind of happens to people who do bad things. And there's numerous examples of that happening in the world. And the thing that I want to discuss is, when is it okay to keep listening to their music? Is it okay to keep listening to their music? The logical answer would be yeah, as long as he is not singing about the crimes that he is accused of. But even that point is a little bit tricky because some of Brand New's songs are lyrically sketchy. There's a track called Me versus Maradona versus Elvis. If you want to look up the lyrics to that song, it appears to be about a guy who basically fills a woman up with alcohol and then takes advantage of the situation, and there's a lot of lyrics in there about Jesse Lacey's self-loathing, which I think is actually quite, like, the cynic in me finds it interesting because there's obviously a lot of regret in those lyrics, and he obviously just resents the type of person that he is. He also sings about, like, how disgusted he is with his actions, but how uncontrollable his urges appear to be. And that's kind of me reading between the lines a little bit. That's not like concrete evidence, but it got me thinking anyway, this whole thing. Kevin Spacey obviously has recently come under similar allegations, I suppose. His character has been completely torn down in the mainstream at the moment, as he was accused of basically sexually assaulting multiple young boys, and in the face of these allegations he just came out and said, well, I'm a gay man. So I don't know what the story is there. At no point has either character, Kevin Spacey or Jesse Lacey, never realized that they rhymed. Wow, that is phenomenal. But neither of them have refuted specific allegations, and that's kind of an interesting point to me because it would appear as though they've done something, right? Like they've come out and apologized for something, Part of me feels like they're not referencing specific moments and refuting them because they're afraid that evidence will come forward that basically confirms everyone's suspicion or confirms these allegations. But the Kevin Spacey thing is interesting because House of Cards are kind of trying to write him out of the picture, even though he is the main star of that show. His face isn't featured on the Netflix posters anymore. I don't think his name is billed in the little blurb. He was also, all of his scenes in an upcoming movie have been removed and they're getting someone else in to film them instead. And it just has me wondering, like, is this the right strategy when it comes to people like this, and should we be removing their art along with them, the thing that they create? I've been reading a lot of the sort of philosophical arguments for this case and whether or not it's acceptable to divorce the art from the artist and whether or not there's like a moral implication of doing so. A lot of people listen to Wagner, who's like a really famous composer. He famously created the Ride of the Valkyries, which is a section that you all know if you go and listen to it. It's in the movie Apocalypse Now. It's in the movie The Blues Brothers. It's also just one of the most famous pieces of music ever written. And that guy was like a major anti-Semite, apparently. There's other stuff like Woody Allen continues to make movies that receive critical acclaim, even though it seems apparent that he's some kind of weird child molester who I think sexually assaulted his niece or something to that effect. And even like his son, I think, or his son-in-law or something like that has come out and said, like, this guy is a monster, like, stop giving this guy publicity, he is terrible. Similarly, Roman Polanski, who is a famous director, he directed Chinatown, which is a movie that still gets much critical acclaim. It still gets referenced as a great movie. And this guy, you know, falsely imprisoned and raped a 13-year-old girl, which is the reason he cannot go back to the United States because he will be arrested. Like, this is a charge that's out over his head and it's pending. And, you know, if he ever does step back on American soil, that's what's going to happen to him. And still, he makes movies that get, like, major mainstream stars in them who aren't turned off by the fact that there is a pending arrest warrant on this guy. And, it's just really weird, and I guess the excuse for these people is like, oh, well, the art is so good, you know, this is such a good creation that we have to divorce it from the person who made it. And an argument that they would make is something like, do you have a problem with Hitler's children? Like, what if Hitler's children grew up to be really wholesome, charitable people? Would we write them off just because of their last name? And I guess it just comes back to the point, if their art doesn't reference their misdemeanors, their crimes, their just horrible things that they've done, the stains on their character, if that's not referenced by the art, I think most people see it as acceptable to listen. And I don't really have a dog in the fight. I'm sort of confused myself a little bit because I really want to continue listening to Brand New, but I fear that every time I think of those lyrics, I think, like, this is a guy who's really tortured. Like, I feel really bad for this guy. Just in general, people who suffer from depressive mood disorders and things like that have a tendency to feel guilty about things that are not actually their fault. And I always thought that Jesse Lacey's message was that, but it in fact appears as though he feels guilty about the harm that he has caused people and the damage he's done to people's lives. And I feel like that by listening to his music, I'm sort of saying, like, oh, well, that's okay. It's like I'm accepting his apology almost. And it's just really strange, and I'd like to know what other people think of it. It's something that I wanted to talk about on my podcast with somebody else. Obviously, I am now talking about it on my podcast. But I wanted someone else's opinion, and I couldn't really think of who the best person to ask would be. But I have a question for you. Like, what would it take for you to stop listening to your favorite artist or your favorite... Like, what would it take for you to stop watching movies that your favorite actor is in? Something like that. Like, what kind of scandal would it take? Because I know that I used to be, not a massive, but, like, I used to enjoy listening to Lost Prophets, and now they are just, like, full-scale deleted, gone off every single one of my devices. I even deleted the library that stores all the music I've ever listened to, so, like, no one would even know I ever listened to them. That's how much I went into, like, I can't even think about that music. It reminds me of the crimes of their singer. Don't Google it if you don't know what they are, because it will actually just change the way you think about life. But yeah, so I guess it's just one of those weird inner conflicts, if I keep listening to their music, is that in some weird moral way disrespectful to his victims? I don't know. And also, it's important to mention that he hasn't actually been accused of anything yet, and we do live in a society where one is innocent until proven guilty. So I don't know. I feel like it's the climate to be asking that question, though, because there are so many instances of just unbelievable sexual assault allegations that come out into the mainstream and then get verified by people who I believe are verifiable, like people whose opinions I trust and people who I respect. And it's just a kind of crazy time. A really kind of extreme example I saw was that the Nazis conducted like numerous experiments on live subjects that were brutal and torturous and just huge human rights abuses. But in doing that, they learned things that we use in modern medicine today. And similarly, I think it was Operation Paperclip was this operation from the US government to smuggle like the leading Nazi scientists over to the US and convert them and get all of their good information and use that for the greater good. And it's okay to do that despite the huge stains on their character. It's something that if you watch Homeland, and if Homeland is any sort of source of reference for the real world, they do stuff like that a lot in Homeland. If they find someone who has committed like federal offenses or just moral discrepancies, then they will turn that person into a double agent and use them against theirs. So I don't know. It's just hard to know what to do with the information in front of us, I suppose. I feel like I'm very low in this. I look like I am wearing a black bin bag of sorts, and it's strange. But anyway, I'd be really interested in your thoughts on that subject, because it's something that's kind of just been on my mind an awful lot lately. So with that out of the way, this is wobbly because my webcam is on a tilt. Anyway, the questions, oh god, the questions. The first question is from Dan, who says, why is your beard game so strong? This is not a strong beard game. I feel like I can usually tell the age of a person by judging how infatuated they are with my beard. And if you think this is a strong beard game, you are probably under the age that you reach in order to actually grow a beard. So Dan, I'm gonna guess that you're like under 23 probably. I will say this about my beard: it's decent for someone who has blonde hair and can inexplicably only grow a ginger beard. Like, this is probably as good as it'll get for me, and I'm fairly satisfied with that. The next question is from FootballFan8, who says, do you think people are too sensitive online these days? Because I feel like people are actively looking to be offended online. This is a weird thing that everybody's talking about at the moment. I feel like you cannot even look for any political discussion without dragging yourself into the YouTube related link wormhole of like Dave Rubin on political correctness, this guy and just constant like centrist voices saying like, oh, political correctness is terrible, we need to do this, people need to stop getting outraged, freedom of speech is the most important thing, etc, etc. And it has like become the most boring discussion happening in the world, because it's something that everyone talks about and everyone seems to come to the same conclusion, which is that freedom of speech should be absolute, regardless of who is offended by it. And then like, oh, but the university campuses and blah blah blah. I don't know if people are too sensitive online these days. I think people in general are sensitive. I think people in general have always been sensitive. When I was growing up, there was an album came out called the Marshall Mathers LP. It was Eminem's second album. It was Eminem's third album if you include Infinite. No one includes Infinite. So the Marshall Mathers LP was released, and there were people picketing outside of his concerts regularly. I'm pretty sure he was like banned from performing in some part of Canada, or they had to like cancel his show because religious people were just out in force with picket signs, and like hundreds of people gathering trying to cancel him from going out and rapping, because his character Slim Shady regularly spoke about like doing lots of drugs or filling women with drugs or killing his wife and killing his kids or killing other kids and stuff like that, and it was really, really dark. And you know, the political correctness movement at the time was against people like Eminem, and I don't remember that being I don't know. I grew up in a Catholic country, and I went to school in religious schools, and I was always sort of taught that Eminem was the bad guy, and that's actually what drew me to Eminem and how I became a fan of Eminem. But that happened in like 1999, right? So I don't think it's a matter of people being too sensitive online these days. What I think it is that people just now have a platform where all of the offended people can unite and just push their opinion straight to the top, and because they do it in such large numbers, people have to listen to them. I think that's always been the case. Like I feel like if you read letters to the editor in the year 1995, or if you looked on message boards from 1997, you would find people who have these opinions. It's just that they weren't really listened to before. I don't know what people made of people picketing outside Eminem concerts back in the day, because I was a kid and I don't remember what the narrative would have been, and just news wasn't as widespread in that sense. Like if there was a riot in a university campus in America in the 1980s, there's no way it was reaching Ireland as a platform for any kind of political discourse involving freedom of speech or anything like that. So I don't actually think it's a matter of people looking for reasons to be offended. I think it's just that, well, I do think it's people looking to be offended, but I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I think people have always done it. I just think that the internet has basically made this a really accessible way of grouping up and shutting people down, and like that's a problem. So that's kind of what I think, but I am very, very bored of the political correctness discussion. But if you are interested in my opinions on that, you should check out, well, I think it's like episode 93. I definitely discussed political correctness in a full episode of the Midnight Hour, and I think myself and my guest did it in a way that was a little bit more original than the type of discussion you usually get around this topic. Next question is from Dr. J, who is not my usual co-host on the Midnight Hour, and he says, is it easier for top strikers in football now than it was, say, 20 to 30 years ago? I don't think so. I actually think in a way it might even be more difficult for top strikers, because I don't know, that's not really a point I've fully thought out, but just the speed of the average fullback now compared to before, I think is significantly quicker. I was looking at stats on this recently. I don't know, I am a fan of George Best, and I like watching clips of George Best, and the way that guy moved around defenders made them all look terrible. I'm sure that is mostly a testament to his ability, but I feel like if you put a player like Ronaldo in that exact same position, you would get even better effect. Like I'd say proportionally the level of difficulty is the same, because football obviously now is such an elite sport. You have to be such an elite athlete. There's no more going out for a game at 3 o'clock after you've had 2 pints at 12, and like that doesn't happen anymore, because it can't happen anymore. That's just not a thing that any real player can do now, because the level they're at is so competitive. It's such an elite thing. So I'd say just proportionally it's probably the exact same that it's always been. Everyone is on the same level for the most part. But yeah, maybe it is easier in the sense that things are more likely to be called a foul nowadays than they were in the past. I'm really not sure. It's a tough question to answer. That's one for the audience, actually. I'd really like to hear what you guys think about it, because I'm very slow to think about football nowadays. I find it really hard to come up with insightful opinions on it, because I fucking get my football information from Sky Sports, and no one on there appears to have even watched football before, but there they are. Next question is from Jake, who says, rank the best ways to cook eggs. What do you want from me here? Do I need to... Okay, like the best ways or the nicest types of eggs? Like the best way to cook an egg is to crack it open into a frying pan, and then like 40 seconds later you've got a fried egg. Like that's the ideal, and you can put it on a sandwich. You can like just eat it by itself. You can have it with whatever. It's pretty much the best. It's easy. You know, most of you are probably students. Like, tell me about fried eggs. It's just the greatest thing. Other than that, you've got boiled eggs, which I recently learned how to cook, so that's good. And there's a poached egg, which I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what that is. And then there's eggs Benedict, which I have no idea what that is either. What else is... Oh, an omelette. An omelette is good, actually. Similar to a fried egg, you simply... you don't crack it open into the frying pan. You crack it open into a bowl or a fucking cup or something. And then you do another one. And then if you have, like... You know, if you've got balls, you'll do another one. If you're, like, not cool, you'll just leave it at 2, whatever. And then you stir it, and then you pour the thing into the frying pan, and then an omelette appears before you. And it's dope. Omelettes are fucking great, and they basically serve as a full meal. So that's really good. So I guess I'd go fried egg, omelette, boiled egg, and then the other two, which are, you know, I'm open to suggestion about, because I don't know what they are. But that's pretty much, you know, the El De Niro guide to frying eggs. Next question is from Dan Lloyd, who says, what podcast do you listen to / favorite podcast episodes? I listen to podcasts every day and need more. Where is my telephone? The types of podcasts I listen to vary a lot, actually. I rarely sort of stick to one, but here's what I'm subscribed to on the Castbox app that I use. There's one called Democracy Now! There's Unfiltered with James O'Brien. There's The Ben Shapiro Show, Soda Jerker on songwriting, The David Pakman Show, We the People Live, WTF with Mark Maron, Brexit Cast, The Midnight Hour, check that one out. Joe Rogan Experience, Stuff You Should Know, Empire Film Podcast, Waking Up with Sam Harris. It's not loading the rest of them right now. Let me go on to SoundCloud. I'll go back over those and tell you the ones that I'd recommend. Really depends on what kind of person you are and what you're in the mood for. It really does change for me. There's a podcast I listen to called... I can't remember the name of it, unfortunately, but it's a good one, so keep that in mind. Yeah, my SoundCloud isn't really that much more interesting than what I just said. Science Versus, that's really good. I kind of learn a lot from that. Roman Mars is 99% Invisible. That's a really, really neat podcast. If you're looking for something that's like completely different to the type of podcast that I do, check out 99% Invisible. I think that's really good. Weird With You, obviously, that's one of the main ones where I actually listen to every single episode. I love those guys, and they're going to come back on my podcast pretty soon. Springsteen Song of the Week. There's an interesting niche podcast for any Springsteen fans out there. So yeah, anyway, out of a really good podcast is Hardcore History by Dan Carlin. I purchased and listened to his Wrath of the Khans podcast. And it's basically like 25 hours of him talking about the Khans and the Mongolian Empire and everything that they did. And it is an unbelievable listen. I haven't listened to a lot of the ones that I listed there. I'm just subscribed to them. The Ben Shapiro Show is pretty good because he is a guy who I don't really agree with a lot politically, but I feel like he's a reasonable and rational voice from the other side. So I sort of like to listen just so that I can be more informed. I feel like I really need to crawl out of the bubble that I'm in at the moment. I think We the People Live with Josh Zepps is really good. He's also very reasonable. I agree with him on a lot, but I think he's very reasonable in his arguments. Waking Up with Sam Harris is one that I find myself going back to an awful lot. I think he's just a really good speaker, and I could listen to him talk all day. He's also just so reasonable in his arguments that I find it really difficult to even find fault with any of them. And then the Joe Rogan Experience is one that I continuously find myself amazed by that guy. I listen to his podcasts, and I don't listen to every single one because there's actually too many. There's too much content there, which is not a bad thing at all. But like this morning I was listening, it was actually Dan Carlin I was listening to on the Joe Rogan podcast, and this was on the bus, and I'd been listening to it since the day before, just in different spurts. And as I was walking to the door of my work, the podcast was over, and I was like, fuck, it's over already. It was 3 hours long, and I was angry that it was over. There's something about him, his interview style, how well read he is versus my perception of how well read he is. It's unreal. He's just absolutely fantastic. I've been a fan of his for years and years. My cousin Dara actually put me on to him, probably like 10 years ago, and like I've never been let down. He's absolutely awesome. So yeah, what are your favorite podcasts? That's something that I'd really like to know, because I'm always on the lookout. Next question is from Duffs, who says, which guests are scheduled to make an appearance in the near future, assuming that there are certain topics already planned? So my friend Kieran, who was on episode 17, I think, he's coming back on very soon. It might even be the next episode. It might be episode 99. I'm not too sure. Nep is supposed to come on, but to be honest, his schedule is like the complete opposite of my schedule. There's no way that they ever meet in the middle. It's just his schedule, his daily schedule is literally, he is at his busiest when I am at my least busy, and for that reason it's just so hard to organize. But I do want him to come back on. Apart from that, I have a couple planned with Dr. John. He's quite busy, as you would imagine, being a doctor. And there is more. I have one planned with a journalist friend of mine who I haven't spoke to in a few years. He's from Australia. It'll be his first time on the show, and I haven't fully decided what we're going to talk about yet, but I think he has a really good voice for podcasting. I think he'll be a really interesting guest. Like, he's a very funny guy. I used to play video games with him. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And then Michelle from Business Insider is also going to come back on pretty soon to talk about the future of print media, because I feel like that's quite an interesting topic. And then I'm probably just going to cancel the Midnight Hour, because that's a lot of planning. Next question is from Daniel JW, who says, what do you think Chester Bennington's legacy will be, and how do you think will Linkin Park continue? I think Chester Bennington is rightfully going to go down as one of the greatest of all time. I truly believe that he just his vocal range is just astounding. It's so far above so Linkin Park did this this like 3-hour concert recently, where they had basically a different person on every song, not on every single song, but they had so many singers from other bands came on and attempted to sing Linkin Park songs, and like very little of them did them any justice. And what's so interesting is that they had to basically get a different style of vocalist for pretty much every song, and it's so crazy to think that literally all of those voices that they had to get to filter into each different song, all of them are just miles beneath Chester's vocal range. And I say that as a fan of like a lot of the people that were on there. Derek Whibley from Sum 41, who like Sum 41 are kind of like a band that everyone likes to make fun of. I think they're actually really good. I like a lot of their riffs and stuff like that from their first 2 albums are class, and they shown that they could be a lot more than a pop punk band if they wanted. Like, the ability's there, no doubt about it, and they do have some dope tracks. But I'm a huge fan of Derek Whibley, and he performed their song The Catalyst, which is a really good song, but like, he was probably the standout performer of the night for the songs from that album, and even he just couldn't do anything close to justice for Chester's voice. So I think it's good that that's recognized too, because Linkin Park are kind of a band that a lot of people like to make fun of because they make music for teenagers, but I think that's going to be cast in a different light now, because what was previously perceived as teen angst that Chester was singing about to exploit that market is now going to be looked at as real suffering from a real like troubled person. So I think Linkin Park's legacy is pretty secure now. Look, like, they're one of the biggest bands of the 21st century. It's crazy. Them and Coldplay. I think Linkin Park have actually sold more than Coldplay. They might actually even be the biggest rock band of the 21st century in total. Don't quote me on that, but it's entirely possible. They captured a mainstream audience on a level that no other band in the new metal sphere did at the time. Like, Limp Bizkit kind of did it, but only for about a year and a half, where Linkin Park just kept going and going and going and going from strength to strength. And I don't know if they will continue. Have they said? Maybe they've said they'll continue. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if they got like a guest singer, a friend of Chester's or something like that. They could do a new album. Like, Mike is quite a good frontman. He's not the best singer in the world, but he does write good songs. So I don't know. It's very possible. It would be really difficult though for them to do that because, like I said, just Chester Bennington is a behemoth, and it's a void that couldn't be filled by 20 odd singers from their show in LA. So I don't know. It's an uphill task for sure. Next question is from Jack Moore, who says, what has been your favorite podcast to record? Mine has to be The Mysterious Stories, one of the early episodes, although I just listened and didn't record it. I really, really, really loved doing the episodes with Jack Brown and Loosemore. Those were probably the most fun I had recording because I really felt like I didn't have to stick to any kind of structure. I could just be me and not the podcaster me. So those were really fun, especially the first episode where Jack Brown and Loosemore came on. I think it might have been episode 19 or 20 something, but that episode is just hilarious, and I tried listening back to it recently, and the audio quality is actually brutal, but that is like one of the funniest things. And what I love about it as well is that was their first time ever being on a podcast, or like ever being on any sort of like YouTube sphere in that sense, and they're just so fucking naturally funny, the two of them. And like all of the listeners were just like, yeah, this is a thing that's happening now, and it's really funny and we really like it. So yeah, that was really good. I've spoken to them. It's so fucking hard when you're an adult to actually organize things, like especially when I just started a new job like 4 weeks ago, and it takes up way more of my time than any job I've ever had before, but which is good because I really like it, so it's not that big of a deal. But then other people have stuff going on in their lives, and it's just really hard to get everyone together. Like I'd love to do another episode with those guys, but I don't know when we can find the time to actually go and do it, which is a shame, but it's also a part of life. So that's sort of just a thing that happens. So I think I will probably leave it there. Pretty good bit of bonus content, I feel like. I did like half an hour talking to myself. Didn't look at myself in the camera towards the second part, which made it a lot easier for me. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there, and thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for listening. Check out like links in the description and stuff. You know, the subreddit will be there. Society 6 if you want to buy any merchandise for your friends or family, or even people that you hate, if you want to bombard them with midnight hour merchandise just to really confuse them. Like, that's totally cool. I would understand that decision. I wouldn't necessarily support it, but I think it would be a nice weird way to go about messing with someone's head. Other than that, you know, stay cool and stay free, and I wish I knew how to fucking end videos. Fuck this.